year is 1962. President John F. Kennedy tells America that they'll put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Bob Dylan's first studio album is released. The first Walmart and the first Taco Bell opens. The Jetsons premiere. Jim Carrey is born. And Amazing Fantasy number 15 is released, and with it, the first ever appearance of Spider-Man. It's important to remember that Spider-Man was the first time comic book readers had ever seen a teenager like Peter Parker as anything more than a sidekick. He wasn't Robin or Aqualad. Spidey was a real bona fide superhero. He was Spider-Man, not Spider, dumb little stupid kid, you know? But unlike other popular superheroes at the time, like Superman, for instance, who was basically a perfect being with very little personal problems, Peter Parker's personal problem-ridden life was front and center in all of his stories. He'd get bullied at school. He'd get sick. One time he had to wear a Halloween knockoff of his own costume because he lost his actual costume and didn't have time to sew up a new one yet. Spider-Man had girl problems. Well, Supes had those too, but Spidey had rent problems. Peter Parker had a terrible job with a jerk boss that he had to deal with in order to pay for things like his elderly aunt's medical expenses. Spider-Man was relatable in a sad, beaten down kind of way. And people loved it, so much so that The Amazing Spider-Man quickly web-slung past all of its competition and became Marvel's #1 selling comic 4 short years later in 1966. So of course, it was only a matter of time before somebody made a cartoon. And who better to make it than Grantray-Lawrence Animation, the same guys who produced Marvel's first cartoon series, The Marvel Superheroes, earlier that same year. And an important thing to note about the Marvel Superheroes show was that it used a lot of limited animation. In 1966, companies like Hanna-Barbera had already popularized limited animation as a cost-effective way to crank out profitable toons during a time that cartoon companies were struggling to stay afloat. And when I say limited animation, by the way, I mean it as creating animations that does not redraw entire frames, but variably reuses common parts between frames. One example would be having just the mouth move on an otherwise still frame, something you see in a lot of anime even today. Other examples would be like recycling or looping animations, which again was totally normal for the time. But Marvel Superheroes really took it to the next level. They basically Xeroxed photocopies of like the rad art from the comics from people like Jack Kirby, all those guys, made minor changes like getting rid of the word bubbles or possibly changing the background if it didn't look good on television. Then they'd animate like one part of it. Somebody talking, maybe a body part moving, Cap throwing a shield, you get the gist. They really put the limited animation, you know? In the winter of 1966, the World of Comic Art magazine ran a 4-page article about the Marvel superheroes and its unique animation process. The article ends by saying that Grantray-Lawrence is already hard at work for an even bigger series for a 6th Marvel character whose identity at this writing was still classified top secret. Even bigger than this? Which classified top secret character could possibly be to merit that? Wait, could it be?
Spider-Man! Spider-Man!
Spider-Man!
Spider-Man! You were expecting Count Dracula?
The first Spider-Man cartoon was born with its premiere episode hitting TVs across the nation on September 9th, 1967, blasting out that incredibly catchy theme song, Spider-Man, Spider-Man, I don't want to play this song and get claimed. After 195 6-minute Marvel superhero shorts, Grantray-Lawrence felt like they were moving up in the world. Ray Patterson, the Ray from Grant-Ray-Lawrence, said, Spider-Man was different. It was completely drawn from the beginning, just like a regular show. We had around 80 people working on the show, so it was a pretty big deal. 13 half hours for ABC. Unfortunately, for Ray Patterson, Grantray-Lawrence would only be around for the first season of Spidey's new show. We were all set up to do it, but then we closed the studio in 1968, after the first season of Spider-Man was finished, and that was the end of that. We trusted the wrong people. Now, who knows who those wrong people were? Maybe their distributor, Krantz Films? Probably. It's hard to tell with available information. The point is that Grantray-Lawrence filed for bankruptcy and closed their doors in Los Angeles in 1968, forcing productions of seasons 2 and 3 of Spider-Man to be picked up by Krantz Films under Ralph Bakshi in New York City. And well, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the Bakshi seasons, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go back to season 1 for a second, talk about that for a little bit. Let's do that. All right, season 1. Season 1 had 20 half-hour-long episodes split into 2 story segments each, besides episodes 3 and 8, which both only had 1 story. Each story follows our hero Spider-Man as he thwarts whatever evil plan the villain happens to have that week. And unlike the comics, which I mentioned before focused a lot on Peter Parker's personal problems and relationships, the show does not. There's no Flash Thompson, Harry Osborn, or Gwen Stacy. Aunt May shows up a couple of times, but not much or for long. The only non-villain characters from the comics that consistently show up are Jameson and his now red-haired secretary Betty Brant, who, for those of you who don't know, was a short love interest for Spidey early in the comics, something the show doesn't really explore, because again, the show doesn't really explore his personal life at all. They basically turn Spider-Man into the kind of hero that existed before, well, superheroes like Spider-Man existed. The only real problem that this guy has is how he's gonna beat up the next bad guy.
Stop! Stop! Gladly, as soon as you give me the diamond.
I'm getting weak.
Give up, Sandy, or I'll turn you into a mud pie.
95% of the stories in Spider-Man 1967 are basically, open up with the villain doing villainous things.
I control the sky. Run, you fools, run!
Then show J. Jonah Jameson wanting pictures of it.
I want pictures!
Then show Spider-Man springing into action and eventually beating up the villain, usually after losing once or twice. Then he webs the villain up and pins a little note to their chest, and then maybe we see J. Jonah Jameson scolding Peter for one reason or another. Then always it'll end with him swinging away down through the city while jazz plays. Some more fun facts. This Spider-Man suit only had webbing on his mask, gloves, and boots, probably to save money. Also, this Spider-Man Spidey emblem only had 6 legs.
I'll take care of Spider-Man! Let's get out of here fast!
I think I just created a work of art.
Season 1 had a lot of Spider-Man's rogue gallery from the comics. Doc Ock, the Lizard, the Vulture, Scorpion, Rhino, Electro, Smythe, Sandman, Green Goblin, Mysterio, Ox, and Cowboy all make an appearance. No Fancy Dan though, what's up with that? There's a few OCs in there as well, like Parafino, the Fly Twins, Stan and Lee, and Dr. Magneto. No, Dr. Magneto, I don't know. So what I want to do now, real quick, is compare some of Spidey's well-known villains' appearances in the comics with some of their appearances in the show. There are some cases, like with Smythe's robot or the Lizard, where the comic story and the show story are basically the same, minus Spider-Man having any personal problems, like I said before, like if it showed him talking to people at school or being worried about his aunt or something, all that was taken out and it just focused on the villain part and that's it. The rest, however, are pretty different, and I'm going to focus on some of those. Doing this will give you a more accurate taste of the first season, while showing you the differences from the show and the comic up to the point that the show came out. In other words, the first 5 years of The Amazing Spider-Man, right? Let's start with Doc Ock.
Hello, Peter.
Hola, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Salut, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Ciao, Peter.
Hola, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Привет, Peter.
Salut, Peter. Since he appears in the first episode of Spider-Man 1967, The Power of Dr. Octopus. At the point that this episode first premiered, September 1967, Doc Ock had appeared in 9 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man. In Amazing Spider-Man number 3, we see the most brilliant atomic researcher in the country, Otto Octavius, hard at work with his neato robotic arms that allow him to work with radiation from behind lead walls. But then the experiment goes awry, resulting in a radioactive explosion. Look, the radiation meter has gone wacky. Something is wrong. It's gotta be a blow-up. The twisted result was Dr. Octopus. The blast somehow melded Otto's robotic arms to his back, but even worse than that, it affected his mind in dark, evil ways, giving him some pretty intense delusions of grandeur. He then holds the hospital he was in hostage while demanding they get him equipment for some mad science. And right when Doc Ock is about to punish some nerd for questioning his superiority, Spider-Man appears. An intense battle takes place. Doc Ock snaps Spidey's web. Nobody had ever done that before. It was crazy. It ends with Doc Ock beating up and really just like straight up humiliating Spider-Man. Spider-Man is crushed, physically and mentally, by his first real defeat. At the beginning of this issue, after beating up some random thugs, Spidey foolishly thought to himself that he needed harder enemies, but now he's considering quitting, questioning his own power and even his ability to be Spider-Man. And Aunt May can tell. She's worried. And as always, he's bummed out that he doesn't have anyone to talk to about his Spider-Man problems. But then, later, he hears Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, give a speech to a group of classmates about how you should never give up, and Spider-Man realizes that he's just being a big dumb baby. Doc Ock, meanwhile, has taken over an atomic lab for nefarious, villainous, power-hungry reasons. Spider-Man breaks into it, ready to fight, then quickly makes his way over to the chemicals and uses his big nerd brain to mix up some sticky goo that he throws at Doc Ock's arms. It slows him down a bit. They fight some more, then Spidey shoots webbing in his eyes and punches him in the jaw, ending the fight. He webs him up, leaving him for the police in typical Spider-Man fashion. He then finds and thanks a very confused Human Torch, and Human Torch was like, "Flamin' fireballs!" And that's the end. You gotta, like, not bad for 1963, am I right? Again, it's only Amazing Spider-Man number 3. You know, they hadn't quite hit their stride with legendary classics like the If This Be My Destiny arc, but still, it was pretty good. Okay, so now for the first appearance of Doc Ock in Spider-Man 1967, which again is in the first episode of the series. Peter Parker is sent out by J. Jonah Jameson to investigate some mystery lights. As he's driving around trying to find them, a giant boulder falls into the road. Peter swerves to avoid it and ends up flying off the side of the cliff, but luckily it's caught by a tree. Peter then Spider-Mans his way out, saving his car in the process. He then immediately sees what he was searching for: mystery lights. He checks it out and just stares in for a bit, but his staring is soon interrupted by Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock explains how he's going to destroy part of the city to show how awesome his new invention that will help him rule the universe is.
It will give me power to rule the universe.
But he doesn't want to hurt people?
To prevent loss of life, I have sent Jameson a warning of my plan.
Meanwhile, J. Jonah Jameson totally ignores Doc Ock's letter. Of course, J. Jonah Jameson, you know what I mean? He then complains about Peter Parker taking too long getting pictures of those mystery lights. Very in character. Back to Spidey. He tries to get away, they fight, Doc Ock snaps his web, just like in the comic, then he gets captured again. Cut to a worried Betty Brant out looking for Peter Parker. A little side note about Betty Brant, by the way, her voice actor really gave it her all whenever she screamed. Anyway, she also gets captured. Doc Ock explains his plan to them again. Spider-Man escapes again, they fight again, and he's defeated again. Then, later, he fights him again. Then Spidey shoots some web in his eyes, and then webs him some more. It ends with J. Jonah Jameson yelling at Peter Parker for not getting pictures of the mystery lights, to which Peter responds sassily. Spider-Man then swings away while jazz music plays.
And to make matters worse, you didn't even get pics of the mystery lights.
Alright, so the story is, it's simple but coherent. The animation is bad, but there's like no gigantic flaws, at least. It's more or less what somebody would probably expect from like an old school classic superhero show, right? Even if Doc Ock's haircut randomly changes, it's one of the better Spider-Man 67 episodes. But still, Peter Parker isn't going through any personal dilemmas like he did in the comics. He's not upset that he doesn't have anyone to talk to or worried about his aunt. He's just there to beat up the bad guy and save the day, you know what I mean? Speaking of bad guys, segue. Speaking of bad guys, the next one is Rhino. Okay, Rhino had been in 3 issues up to the point that the show was created. In issue 41, we see a happy Peter Parker walking down the street thinking about the sick new motorcycle he just bought. And then, as so happens in this unpredictable world of ours, completely by accident, totally unexpected, a chance meeting with his ex-girlfriend Betty Brant, who he hadn't seen since issue number 34 when she left New York due to being torn over whether or not she should accept Ned Leeds' proposal for marriage or try to make it, work out with Peter. Even though, unknown to her, Peter had already made the hard decision not to be with her because he knows that she could never accept him being Spider-Man. But I guess he has a lapse in judgment and talks to her, But right when Peter is starting to realize that the spark is totally gone, none other than Ned Leeds just happens to bump into them. Peter sees how interested Betty is in Ned and gets out of there with a bad excuse. As he leaves the two of them together, he thinks about how he and Betty really didn't have anything in common at all, and all she really was the first girl that he thought he loved. Aww. His relationship with Betty has been a pretty big part of the comic up to this point, so understandably, he's bummed out. What is this, a soap opera? It's Spider-Man, baby. Anyway, Peter Parker sees the Rhino on a news broadcast and thinks to himself, man, I really don't want to deal with that shit right now. Then, after being ignored by his boss, who was too focused on his cool astronaut son who was in town, Peter returns home and talks with his Aunt May about his sick new motorcycle, but her mind was seemingly somewhere else and she didn't really seem to care much. A strange way for Aunt May to react, since she's usually chronically worried about everything. Unknown to Peter, she was actually worried, but about Mary Jane's aunt's proposition to move in with her. Afterwards, we see Peter sitting at home, depressed. He wants to throw on his Spidey outfit and go swing away some of his blues, but he knows he needs to focus on his term paper. But after hearing that Rhino is rampaging his way through the city, Spidey suits up and swings into action. Meanwhile, Rhino has already kidnapped Jameson's astronaut son, who he wants because the astronaut was exposed to mysterious space spores that other countries and interested wealthy parties would pay top dollar to examine. Spidey finds the Rhino and puts a stop to it. But then Peter remembers afterwards that he forgot to set up his camera, which means no pictures, which means no money. Ugh. He shows off his sick new motorcycle to Gwen, but she doesn't really seem too impressed. Or is she? Peter returns home to his aunt, who is worried about him. Like I said, she always is. The story ends with Aunt May telling Peter that he's showing up for dinner this weekend where he'll finally meet Mary Jane for the first time. And Peter thinks about how it'll probably be a waste of time, which obviously we know it's not, but that's he didn't know that. Okay, so yeah, again, that's a Spider-Man comic. Even back then, it was just filled to the brim with this young man's personal problems. It's a huge part of the story, a huge part of what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, Now, let's take a look at Rhino's second appearance in Spider-Man 1967, episode 14, The Golden Rhino. In this episode, the Rhino steals a bunch of gold from an armored truck because he wants to melt it down to create a life-size statue of himself out of it, because he thinks that'd be cool. But as he's doing it, he realizes he doesn't have enough gold, but he knows just where to get it. Spider-Man tries to catch him, but is unsuccessful. We then see Jameson for a moment telling Peter Parker that he thinks Spider-Man and the Rhino are working together. Very in character, honestly, of Jameson, yet again, In the next scene, we see Spider-Man finding Rhino's base of operations. Then he falls through the roof. Rhino and Spidey fight, during which Rhino ends up bringing the whole place down and thinks he beat Spidey in the process. He didn't, obviously. And when Rhino finds this out later, he realizes that he must destroy Spider-Man, for only he knows his secret, that he made a statue of himself, from stolen gold. But meanwhile, he's got to keep his statue safe by hiding it in the sewers. They fight again. This time, Spider-Man shows Rhino how strong his new webbing is. Rhino runs away into the sewers, seemingly realizing there's no way he can beat that sweet new web. Spidey catches him and webs him up. We then see Betty Brant telling Jameson that Rhino and the golden statue are outside of the Daily Bugle and that Spider-Man left a note. He's pissed. Again, classic Jameson. Honestly, this show kind of nails this character. The voice actor is good too.
Parker! Where the blazes have you been? Shut up!
Anyway, then we see Spidey swinging away while the sweet jazz plays, right? Okay, now last but certainly not least is the Green Goblin. Green Goblin appeared in all of these comics up to the point that he appeared in the 1967 cartoon. Ever since Green Goblin first appeared in issue number 14, his secret identity was a big part of his intrigue. Nobody knew who he was, and the reader's curiosity just grew and grew and grew with every new appearance up until he was finally revealed to be Norman Osborn 2 years later in issue number 39.
No. Not again.
I'm your friend, Norman.
Okay, so there's some conflicting information about this next part from Stan Lee, the writer of Spider-Man, obviously, and the original artist slash plotter, which is basically the other writer, original writer, Steve Ditko. According to Stan Lee, he always wanted Green Goblin to be somebody that Peter Parker knew, while Ditko wanted it to be some random stranger. Stan said that this was one of the main reasons Ditko left Marvel Comics before Green Goblin's identity is revealed in number 39 when John Romita Sr. took over. However, Ditko claims that it was his idea to make him Norman Osborn, and that he had that idea even before the first Green Goblin story had ever been written. And since Ditko drew Norman Osborn as a nameless background character in 23, 25, issue 26, and 27, and also stated that I planted the Green Goblin's son, same distinctive hairstyle, in the college issues for more dramatic involvement and storyline consequences, it definitely seems like Ditko is the one who's, in the right here. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get at here was that Gobby's secret identity was very important at the time. Well, in Spider-Man 1967, that none of that's ever mentioned ever. You have no idea who this guy is, and the question is never even asked. Maybe he's a literal Green Goblin. You know what I mean? You don't know. And this Green Goblin doesn't want to take over the Mafia. He doesn't want to torture and kill Peter Parker after he finds out that he's Spider-Man. He doesn't want to be something of a scientist himself. He wants to summon demons, baby. Evil demons from the underworld, That's what he wants. So what happens is Green Goblin steals a book of witchcraft. Spider-Man fails to stop him. Gobby later tricks Jameson by casting a spell on him that basically turns him into like a psychic conduit that allows him to communicate with the evil spirits from the other side.
Pernas, Mondos, Inferna.
The spirits speaking through Jameson tell him that he needs the Scepter of Osiris if he wants to summon them, right?
You must have the Scepter of Osiris to stir and mix the brew. And then demons of the underworld will come to do your bidding.
Spider-Man fails to stop him again. Green Goblin gets the scepter. Spider-Man fails to stop him again. Spider-Man later follows the spell-struck Jameson to the graveyard where the Green Goblin is trying to raise some evil spirits. Spider-Man interrupts him, and during the fight afterwards, Green Goblin makes a plea with the evil spirits to help him out. And they're like, no. Green Goblin is devastated. Spidey webs him up and leaves him for the cops. The next scene, we see Jameson talking to Betty Brant about how he woke up in a jail cell next to Green Goblin. He's pissed. Spider-Man hears them, makes a funny joke, a very funny joke. Then we see him swinging away to jazz. Alright, that concludes the comparing the show and the comic book segment of the video. Hopefully that gave you a taste of season 1. It has more generic superhero feels than the comic did, but it was also kind of charming with its silliness and its limited animation, It's where this meme came from. Jameson, again, is 10 out of 10. And there are more than a few truly great moments.
I told you your webs were useless.
Spider-Man! He's melting!
It's too hot. It's too hot. Something must have hit the control lever. Turn it. Oh.
He was nothing but wax.
I'm free! And so is he!
You're not wax?
No. And now,
you face the real Parafino.
Anyway, like I said before, Grantray-Lawrence met its untimely demise at the end of season 1, and Ralph Bakshi took over season 2 and eventually 3 with Krantz. And Ralph Bakshi is quite the character. Bakshi would later be known for Fritz the Cat, the first X-rated, which is just like R by today's standards, American animated film, and later for the 1978 Lord of the Rings animated film. He was a super cool bad boy animator that was known for far-out experimental alternative animation, full of drugs, sex, and violence. He really went all out in films like Heavy Traffic, American Pop, and Fire and Ice. But before all of that, he was in Toronto, Canada, working on Rocket Robin Hood. And unknown to Bakshi, his boss, Steve Krantz of Krantz Films, was currently in a legal dispute with the producer, Al Guest. And after Krantz was unable to come to an agreement with Guest, Krantz told Ralph Bakshi to steal the series model sheets and come back to America. Something that Bakshi did. Bakshi agreed, right? When the Canadian company found out, the Toronto police were notified and a warrant was put out for Bakshi's arrest. And while the fugitive Ralph Bakshi was making his escape literally on the run from the law, he was stopped by an American Border Patrol officer who asked him what he was doing. Bakshi responded, "All of these guys heading into Canada to dodge the draft and I'm running back into the States. What the fuck is wrong with that?" The guard laughed and let Bakshi through. What a legend, right? He made his way to the Garment District in New York City, which Bakshi described as the worst neighborhood in the world. It was there where he founded his studio, Bakshi Productions, that he said had creaky, uneven floorboards and terrible air circulation. And it was here where he worked for Krantz Films to make the rest of Rocket Robin Hood, and later took over for Spider-Man. Alright, so that brings us to seasons 2 and 3. Seasons 2 and 3 had an even smaller budget than season 1. Ralph Bakshi stated that they were given around 10 to 12 grand and about a week to finish each episode. Even back then, that was not much. Bakshi also said that Krantz was the kind of guy who just wouldn't pay you if you missed a deadline. And even though Bakshi was very friendly with Stan Lee, he felt like Stan could care less about the show. During an interview, Ralph Bakshi said, "I should also point out that my distaste for comic book publishers and editors rose vehemently at that point. Marvel Comics could care less what the guys on the coast," talking about Grantray-Lawrence, "were doing, and they could care less what I was doing. In other words, they didn't give a shit what I did with the show as long as they got their weekly stipend from ABC." Stan Lee had quit being a consultant after season 1, but it seems like he didn't consult much then either. But yeah, Ralph Bakshi said that he had no input from Marvel at all, positive or negative, and that it was a shame because he liked the character Spider-Man and thought if they were, even a little helpful, the show could have been a lot better. But oh well, Here we go. Alright, seasons 2 and 3. With seasons 2 and 3, the goal even more so than with Grantray-Lawrence was really just to get the cartoon out, and that was it, And with what they were given, that was not an easy task. But Bakshi was determined to accomplish it by any means necessary, and to even spice it up with his own unique touch here and there if he could. Bakshi knew his new studio depended on getting this show out, and later even said that if not for Spider-Man, there would have never been Fritz. Alright, let's start with the first episode of Season 2, first airing on September 14th, 1968, titled The Origin of Spider-Man. This episode was the first time Spidey's origin was ever shown outside the comics, and its story was pretty much completely taken from the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine #1's B story In the Beginning, which was released earlier that same year in April 1968, and was the first time Spidey had an origin story since his first appearance in Amazing Fantasy #15. And in case you were wondering, I'm sure so many of you were, Spectacular Spider-Man Magazine #1 was an extra page special that was released in black and white for some reason. I don't know, a first for Spider-Man who was always in color before. It looked really cool though, the black and white. And like I said, the origin of Spider-Man took a lot from In the Beginning, even quite a bit of the dialogue.
What's come over me? Am I going mad? I'm scaling this wall just as easily as I can walk. My fingers alone are adhering, supporting me. I'm like some sort of giant insect, like a wall-crawling human spider.
But it definitely added some new things too, gave it its own strange, dark, yet psychedelic flavor.
It's either a crazy psychedelic dream, There's only one other possible answer.
You never saw any shots like this when Grantray-Lawrence were running things, you know what I mean? And look at these crazy, trippy backgrounds everywhere. I mean, listen, it still has animation that looks like this in it, you know? But like, for what it is, the first episode has some genuinely cool stuff in it. Really, all the first episodes do. Lots of original animations, cool shots, and a surprising amount of style. Origin of Spider-Man, Kingpin, Swing City, and Criminals in the Clouds are all total bangers as far as Spider-Man 1967 is concerned. Years later, Ralph Bakshi would give a bit of an explanation for this, saying that with the earlier episodes of a season, there was a lot less pressure and more time to make a more quality product, but as the season went on and the deadlines seemed to get shorter and shorter, the quality declined. And wow, that is really made apparent by the end of the series, which I'll talk about a bit later.
Heavens, you loved him! Heavens, you loved him! Heavens, you loved him!
Yeah, you too.
But even though the origin of Spider-Man is almost entirely ripped from the comic, at the beginning of the episode we see something entirely new. Peter hanging out on a college campus, a small taste of Peter Parker having a personal life, right? These kinds of scenes, while non-existent in season 1, popped up a few times during Bakshi's run. Ralph Bakshi, I guess because he was a fan of Spider-Man himself at the time, wanted the cartoon to focus more on Peter's personal life, like in the comics. He thought superheroes in general were pretty mundane and boring, and the best thing about Marvel's new heroes is that they had personal problems. It's what made them hip. He hit the nail on the head, right? But what he wanted to do compared to what actually ended up happening was very different. I mean, he got a few things in there here and there, but you know, it doesn't really stick too much. But let me talk about that a little bit anyway. So like I mentioned before, this show doesn't have Gwen Stacy, Flash Thompson, Harry Osborn. Mary Jane shows up in season 3 once, but that's it. And this was probably due to licensing costs for the characters. So Bakshi made up new characters like Roy Robinson, who was a jock bully similar to Flash Thompson. He showed up in the 4th episode of the 2nd season, Criminals in the Clouds.
Most boys get girl trouble sooner or later. And this goes even for a teenager with superpowers like Peter Parker, alias the Amazing Spider-Man. Listen.
In this completely new story, Peter Parker wants to go on a date with Susan Shaw. She rejects him and then immediately swoons over the college football team's quarterback, Roy Robinson, who makes fun of Peter for no reason. Peter responds with wanting to beat him up. Susan gets angry and tells Peter that he should join the football team if he's such a hero. Peter then gives off minor incel vibes.
Women.
Afterwards, Peter goes and talks about his personal problems to himself, alone, as he looks deep into his coffee. He finally decides to join the football team to impress Susan. Unfortunately, the football coach tells Peter that tryouts have already passed, and even though he doesn't think he's got what it takes to be a star player, he'll let him be the water boy. I guess he felt sorry for the little nerd. So, the episode goes on. Roy Robinson gets kidnapped because his dad is rich. Spidey swings around for a while. He rescues him after being like, man, why do I gotta rescue this jerk? But yeah, he rescues him, gets him back to the game, where Spidey, for some reason, helps him win by using his powers to, cheat. Basically, to cheat. Roy then gets the glory from winning the game and gets the girl, Susan. Afterwards, Peter Parker is told that he's no longer the water boy because he's missed the game. The end. And hey, look at that. It kind of feels like a real Spider-Man story in like a personal problem-ridden Peter Parker can't catch a break kind of way, right? Like I said, this was one of the early episodes that was a banger, even if it, isn't perfect. But wait, maybe you're wondering, who's Susan Shaw? Well, Susan Shaw is one of the many dates that Peter has throughout the Bakshi seasons. A lot of them are named Susan. Not sure why. Bakshi and his crew also created a ton of original villains. Kingpin is actually the only comic book villain that shows up in season 2. And again, the OC villains were really just there because they were trying to cut back on licensing costs. But that's fine. Who needs somebody like the Green Goblin when you have the Green Mad Scientist, the Green Sky Master, Master of the Skies, or the Green Gangster, these little green men, these other green villains, or the Green Sorcerer and his green monster, this green lizard thing, Pardo, who is green, the Green Shaman and his green boys, a green guy named Clive and his homie, who is also green, the Green Dr. Zap. Dr. Zap, the Green Nazi, Baron von Ranton-Raven, another green mad scientist, the Green escaped prisoner, the Green Clown. Oh wait, no, he's not actually green. Sorry, my bad. That was my mistake. The Green Dr. Atlantean, who's just this guy, slightly redrawn. Yet another green mad scientist. These green frog ghosts. Green Mysterio. Green Mysterio. Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to Green Mysterio. Okay, first of all, that's a lot of green villains, right? I don't know why they did that. If you do, please tell me in the comments, okay? All I know is they reused villains being green a lot. But that's not all they reused. Segue. The biggest example is definitely Spidey's recycled swinging animation, which season 1 also had, but not nearly as much. Season 1 would have like 20 to 30 seconds of swinging per episode, while episodes of season 2 and 3 would have like 3, 4, 5 minutes of swinging. This was used to fill up time in episodes to help with deadlines. Bakshi once said, "Whenever we fell short a couple of minutes, I just kept the son of a bitch swinging." And oh boy, did he ever. But the swinging isn't the only recycled animation. Here's Spidey's hand shooting webs. Here's Spidey changing clothes. Here's Spidey doing this.
Now it's your
Friends demand a refund.
Where's Stacy and...
Okay, but moving on to season 3, which is a treat. You might have thought we were done talking about recycled animations. Well, season 3 recycles whole ass episodes from season 1. It happens with the Lizard, Vulture, Rhino, whose 2 season 1 episodes are smashed together into one big episode. They all use the majority of the original episode's animations, but we'll like mix it up a bit and give it different dialogue, right? With the Lizard, the season 1 story is that Spider-Man goes to Florida to meet Dr. Connors and finds out that his experiments have led to him becoming the Lizard. Pretty similar to the comics, minus him doing the experiments in order to regrow his missing arm. A missing arm would be too much for the kiddos, you know. But in the season 3 story, it has a lot of the same shots with, you know, new Bakshi backgrounds, but now it's a monster that he accidentally created that just happens to wear Dr. Connors' clothes and is never in the same room as Dr. Connors. Take a look at this.
Take your medicine like a good lizard. I'd better be right. Eureka! I was right.
What happened?
Take your medicine. Wow. Not only did it take away his intelligence, it took away him. Now to find Connors.
It was a nightmare.
Season 2 actually did the whole taking an entire episode thing too, now that I think about it. Like in Menace from the Bottom of the World and Spider-Man Battles the Mole Man, these 2 episodes were only a few episodes apart, and look at what they do.
My name is Hammond, and I represent the Daily Bugle. I demand to be set free at once, with all these innocent people.
What do you intend doing with us, you monster?
Not so fast. You are in no position to demand anything. I am the ruler here.
As for you, you are not important. I am most interested in seizing Spider-Man.
You'll never get away with this, you monster.
You can't get away with this, you fiend. You can't hold us prisoner here. We'll revolt. It's gone. It vanished. Just don't believe it.
If I didn't
How can a
I
solid think it was building just evaporate like that into nothing?
Oh, here's another interesting one. In episode 39, we see Captain Stacy, a character from the comics, right? Gwen Stacy's dad, even though Gwen Stacy isn't in the show, again. Even though he looks similar to how he does in the comic, his name is Ned Stacy instead of George Stacy. Again, probably licensing, I don't know. Then in episode 42, the big brainwasher, we see Captain Stacy again, but now he looks like this for some reason. Licensing again, maybe? Again, I don't know. Episode 42, by the way, is the one episode with Mary Jane in it, and she dances like this. And then we never see her again. She dances like this. She has a little bit of dialogue.
Roy, I'm gonna gonna dig this. Little old Mary Jane's gonna have the spotlight all to herself. Oh, wow. Snap your map chance, snap your map chance, snap your map chance. Compliments of the house.
How nice. A free photograph.
And we never see her again. That's Mary Jane in Spider-Man 1967. And by the way, this episode is taken largely from The Amazing Spider-Man number 59. The differences are there's no Gwen. Captain Stacy is Mary Jane's uncle.
Hey, there's Captain Stacy, Mary Jane's uncle.
And Captain Stacy, like I said, looks totally different. Look, Mary Jane dances in the comic too. Anyway, then we see Captain Stacy again in episode 50, and he looks like this and this. They use both. They use both in the same episode. They just cut back from this, and you're supposed to know that this is the same guy either way. You know, this was the series being bad at the end part that I said that I'd get to later, by the way. We're here now. This is what I was talking about, right? I mean, what an oversight. Do you think they were like halfway through before they noticed that like those two guys look different? And Bakshi was just like, who cares? We only have 2 episodes left. It's fine. But Spider-Man 67 didn't just recycle animations from Spider-Man 67. They also did it from the completely different show Rocket Robin Hood, which, if you remember, was the previous show right before Spider-Man that Bakshi worked on. In episode 28, they used
Before I silenced him, he sent a distress call to Rocket Robin Hood.
Rocket Robin Hood. How delightful.
Before I could silence him, he sent out a distress call. You think anyone will listen?
I don't think so. It's one of those surprises now.
Let's get out of here.
Grief,
I'm with you. Come on.
in episode 49, The Revolt of the Fifth Dimension, again, near the end of the series, right? They take...
Come forward into the realm of the infinite. Come forward into Dementia 5. Observe. Climb the stairway of mystery, then cross the threshold of reality, and enter into the realm of Dementia 5.
I can't stop myself.
I'm being
pulled up the stairs. What's on the other side? What's on the other side? Come closer. I can't stop myself. Can't stop ourselves.
It was lost when our ship exploded.
It was lost when you pulled me into this world of yours, buddy.
You lie!
You can hide nothing from me. My X-ray intelligence reveals that it is none of your business. Very well. I have no more use for you.
Intelligence.
Intelligence!
A malignant vision with a will of pure evil.
Got to think.
Think.
Wait a minute. When I closed my eyes just then, suddenly we were floating out in space again.
Wait a minute. When I closed my eyes just then, suddenly I was back in New York City again.
What? Try it. Close your eyes. That's it. The way out of here.
Try it again. That's it. The way out of here.
Stop.
That's your secret. Dementia 5 is all illusion.
Stop. That's your secret. Dementia 5 is all illusion. It exists only in our own brains. If we
close our minds and eyes to you, we'll be free.
ABC never aired this episode, by the way. I wonder why. Wonder what ABC's problem with this was. Bakshi went all out, dude. All right. right, well, I think we're about finished. And something to end on, thinking back on all this, all the research I did, all the comics and episodes of Spider-Man I watched, I think one of the biggest things that stands out in my mind was how big a bummer it was that Stan Lee and Krantz didn't give Bakshi the money and time he needed to make a quality product. I mean, imagine in some alternate dimension where Spider-Man 1967 had some of the incredible storylines and writing from Amazing Spider-Man and looked like Heavy Traffic or American Pop instead of this.
Welcome, Spider-Man. Welcome, Spider-Man. Welcome, Spider-Man.
Would have blown people's minds, you know? The other big thing that sticks out is like the sheer amount of recycled animation, of course. That's the other big thing. I love that. But hey, you know, despite all of its flaws, Spider-Man 1967 is still very charming in its own strange and terrible way. And I guess that's definitely something to be thankful for. Good enough reason to like it, you know? Looking back, Ralph Bakshi had this to say about his time working on Spider-Man in an article published by the Globe and Mail. Can you imagine a young man staggering home from the studio burnt out every night of the week? Bakshi recalls in a fit of laughter from his home in Silver City, New Mexico. My girlfriend left me, my cocaine dealer left me, and I lost more girls to Spider-Man than I can count. I wouldn't do it again no matter what I was paid.
Oh, wow. I'm so tired, so tired. Don't ever feel like swinging again for anyone or anything.
And I was working 7 days a week around the clock to get the quality right. I was afraid that if I left the studio, the whole thing was going to collapse. Maybe he left the studio near the end there, right? Anyway, and only a young, crazy 28-year-old would ever take a job like that, he says. It was almost like they were saying, go ahead and do it. We dare you. And in an interview with the Amazing Spider Talk, he said that he never watched the episodes on the air after he was finished with them. And he still hasn't to this day. He never saw the show. He was too worried about what he might see. Not only that, he was so soured on the experience with the character that he never watched another Spider-Man show or movie ever again. He was just done with it. Damn, that's rough. But again, you know, it did lead to the rest of his successful career, so there's that, you know, but still pretty rough. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and oh wait. I forgot to talk about Mysterio being green in the 3rd season for some reason. Okay, again, licensing cost, I don't know. The episode is heavily based on issue number 67 and was an actual, like, new episode, unlike Vultures and Rhinos and Lizards' new episodes, quote unquote. Yeah, it's just especially strange because he's in the 1st season and he looks like this, and now he looks like this. Okay, now I'm gonna go for real. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm gonna be making a few other small Spidey vids. One in particular is about Mary Jane's demise in the 90s Spider-Man tune. So be sure to subscribe and, watch that when it comes out. And hey, maybe I'll even go back and like look at some old 1967 episodes in the future if you guys, want me to. Yeah, but until then, thanks for watching, and I'll end with this clip.
Why do you want us to save him, Captain Stacy? Maybe we ought to let the mob finish him. The specialist will anyway.
We'll let the specialist decide what to do with him. Maybe he'll want to question him. I've got to save him. It's the only chance the city has. The mob, my men, they're like robots. Just like they obey the specialist, they'll obey me. I'm the only one not enslaved, the only one left free. Can't let them know it. Must make them think I want to jail him so the specialist can question him. He'll have a chance to recover at the prison infirmary. Even if he was awake, I wouldn't be able to let him go. The mob and my men would get too suspicious. I just hope he's okay.